Welcome back to Air Quality Matters. And I believe we already have the tools and knowledge we need to make a difference to the quality of the air we breathe in our built environment. The conversations we have and how we share what we know is the key to our success. I'm Simon Jones, and coming up, a conversation with Hector Altamirano, Professor at UCL the Bartlett and the Academic Director of the UKCMB. We talk about damp and mould a lot on this podcast, an ever-present challenge to our built environment and health globally. But the conversation is often quite binary in nature. You either have mould or you don't. A mould problem is either solved or it isn't. To exist on this earth is to coexist with mould. Its nature, presence, and impacts are deep, profound, and nuanced. And its interrelationship with our built environment is fascinating. I sat down with Hector, who is without doubt one of my favourite people in London, to discuss this fascinating subject. Hector has been at the forefront of study and standards in moisture in buildings for a long time, and his work at the UKCMB with others is an important epicentre for discussion around moisture in buildings. We talk about the complex nature of mould, moisture balance in buildings, and the work the UK Centre for Moisture in Buildings does. Plus, a few tangents in the conversation as per normal. Recorded live from UCL in London, I hope you enjoy this one. Don't forget to check out the sponsors in the show notes. This is a conversation with Hector Altamirano. I mean, what's interesting to me is the conversation around damp and mould in social housing is, particularly social housing, but more broadly in the built environment, I think is often presented quite binary in nature, in that there's either mould or there isn't, usually because it's visible or it isn't, or that we need to eradicate mould in some way, that if it's there, it's a problem. And my feeling is it's much more nuanced than that the mould is a natural part of our environment. And I thought that would be an interesting start for the conversation about how we think broadly in terms of damp and mould in our buildings. And I know that's something you talk about quite a bit in your presentations, is about what do we mean by mould? Like, what is it? How widespread is it? I mean, can you speak to that a little bit as to how perhaps we should start thinking about mould in our lives, as it were?
Yeah, that is a good question, and was a good start of the conversation. I think because I don't think we know enough about mold as a microorganism, or as the kingdom of fungi in general, and how they relate to the built environment. And I have been doing, as you know, research on mold for many years. And actually, when I started to do research at UCL, it was about mold and trying to find the ways of preventing mold from growing on buildings. And my first approach was, how much I know about mold. I mean, how can I prevent something from growing in buildings if I don't know enough? So this is how my journey started in some way. And this is something that I try to teach my students, but also every time that they invite me to give a presentation, and try to educate the audience a bit more about mold. I'm not an expert on mold per se. I didn't study microbiology. I'm an architect by background. But I thought that understanding mold from as an organism is quite important. It's the only way in which we can really prevent them. Now, how do you prevent mold? Mold, we're talking about, you were saying, we talk about thousands of mold species and genera, which is the families. So how you can prevent mold if you don't know which species you're trying to tackle? It's the same that, in my presentation when I talk about animals, how you can prevent animals from growing in the world, in the environment. That is really difficult. Let's think on one species at least, and then you can start to probably understand the problem. And this is how I think we don't know enough about mold. We know a lot, but still there is a huge journey to try to understand from a research point of view what is there.
And is your sense from microbiologists that mold is still a frontier science in a lot of ways? I mean, we know, like you say, it's like, I guess the analogy for me is like air quality. We know a lot about air quality. We know a lot about air chemistry and things like that, but there's still a sense that there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to know. Is that your sense from the microbiology world, that there are just thousands and thousands of species and we know a lot, but we feel like we're still peering into a big hole, really, in our knowledge?
Yes. I mean, we know a lot. I'm pretty sure the microbiologist expert, they know much more than I know about mold. But bringing mold to the built environment area or to physics or building physics is something completely different.
Yeah.
And because it's not just about mold, it's about the condition between our buildings, is the building physics of a building, is when we talk about moisture. So there are so many parameters, so many areas that we need to bring together to try to understand how we can prevent it. Now, in my journey to try to understand mold, now this is what I said when I give a presentation, is that for me, mold is some kind of messenger. It's not that bad. Obviously, if it develops to a point that can be dangerous, it's something that we should prevent. But is this messenger? It's telling you that there is something wrong in your home. You need to deal with it. So in some way, I don't see mold as the body in this equation or in this.
Well, it's an organism, and it's signposting that it now has the conditions to flourish and to flower and to be visible. We perceive that as something wrong in the environment of our home, but it doesn't. It's a sign for us, perhaps, that the building is out of kilter. But I guess for the mold, it's going happy days.
Absolutely.
This is now great for me.
Yeah, if mold is growing, it's because there are perfect conditions for them to grow.
Yeah.
That's it. And as soon as they start to grow, they're gonna create more spores. They're gonna release the spores. That they're gonna continue their process of trying to survive. That is their nature in some way.
Yeah.
So happy for them.
Yeah, yeah. And and our buildings don't live in isolation from the rest of the world. They are part of the environment. Mold is a natural part of the environment. So left to its own devices, that environment will consume that building and rot it and decay it and bring it back to the soil eventually. Like that's just what we're doing generally with our built environment, is fighting against that natural decay process, really, in a lot of ways.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we need to do it. I mean, obviously mold in excess or a particular type of a species, they can harm certain individuals, and they're going to be more exposed. People with specific physical conditions or weak immune systems. So we need to try to avoid mold from growing in buildings for sure. But as you said, this is something natural. So it's going to happen. They are there. At the moment, we are breathing most spores.
Yeah.
You're coming from another part of, not from London, and you brought your own spores from wherever I was from. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the air is full of spores. So they are here. We're not going to ever get rid of and have a completely clean environment.
Is it fair to say they're part of what we'd call a microbiome, mold and mold spores? Would they be classified in that they're part of the natural organisms of an environment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So at some level, I guess it's not healthy to have no mold in an environment. It plays some part at a very small level, even at decaying dead flies on your windowsill, or it's breaking down. Mold has a job to do, doesn't it, in breaking down stuff everywhere in our environment. So we don't want to get to a point where we've got a sterile environment, I guess, where there's zero mold in our buildings.
that is a really good question.
Yeah.
And probably that is a research question for someone to look at in more detail. If you ask me, I mean, coming from another country where probably I grew up in an environment where you hopefully you are exposed to as many things as you can outside, is the only way to build your immune system to be stronger, which is completely different to what we are doing today, that we're trying to clean everything now. I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't have the knowledge to be able to say, yeah, and completely sterile environment is something that we need to look for. And mold, we need more. I want to believe that we need mold. I don't know. I'm not so sure what is our relationship, physical relationship with mold, if we need to breed them or not. I mean, I don't know what is the role that they play in our body.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Is there some kind of symbiotic relationship there?
There is something, but I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we have, for what I understand, we have a species of mold within our body that is there. I don't remember the name of this, which probably I'm completely wrong, but yeah. I wouldn't be able to say, yes, we need mold to be able to physically, I mean, be healthier. I'm not so sure. But you're right in terms of the biome. So we interact with a biome that is full of mold spores and bacteria and probably all the type of microorganisms. And probably we need that.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when we look at the built environment, and I use housing because housing is there's such a discussion around damp and mold and housing for obvious reasons. But the conversation is so binary, and I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that when you're trying to grapple with something big, and I think damp and mold in housing is a big problem. It's an existential problem to try and solve. One of the first goals in that process is to try and understand what good looks like. Where are we heading? What's the direction of travel? And if we're wrong to say from the start that the direction of travel is no mold in homes or the eradication of visible mold, are we setting a standard for ourselves that's either impossible to actually achieve or undesirable in some way? And that's the interesting thing for me, is that kind of discussion about if we want to understand the roadmap, because I'm involved, as you are, with housing organisations, talking to them about strategies for dealing with damp and mold challenges. The direction of travel is just kind of loosely termed, dealing with damp and mold in housing. But to really define that path, a bit like we've done with sustainability, trying to understand the path to net zero, you've got to kind of figure out what does good look like here. And that, for me, actually isn't clear. I know from experience, particularly in this part of the world, it's almost impossible in a lot of buildings to eradicate visible mold 365 days of the year. There's certain areas of a property, there will be enough cold surfaces or moisture naturally because of wet areas or so on that you'll get some mold.
Yeah.
So there's it's that trying to figure out what the good looks like. How do we frame what an acceptable or tolerable level of it is if we accept that there's something there? Do you know what I mean?
I know, but it's a difficult, I guess, question and discussion, to be honest, because I think we should try to eradicate. We don't want any mold growing in buildings, but we need to accept, as you said, that mold is going to grow at some point. This is something that you cannot get rid completely. Now, the issue in social housing is that you don't know who is using your homes.
Yeah.
And again, you don't know what their health condition, and what you don't want, as a local authority, to provide a house that is unhealthy. There's a house where actually mold is likely to develop. You need to try to avoid that for sure.
Yeah.
I have mold in my home, so and probably try to avoid having it. And I try to educate my family on what to do in order to prevent mold. Specifically, as soon as you see something, let's clean it. But as you said, I mean, it's quite difficult because they are part of our environment. They have been here probably in Earth before us. So how you can get rid of something that is so important.
Yeah. And you know, I suppose, and I often talk about it, well, ad nauseum actually, on the podcast, is this looking at stuff through a risk lens. And the interesting thing through a risk lens is that it's very difficult to have no risk. You know, so it's not, we're not saying that it's eradicatable, but what's the tolerable? What's the tolerable level? What's an acceptable risk? As I forget what the health and safety statement is, but am I doing everything that can be reasonably expected of me today to mitigate the risk? Like, that's kind of the question you're asking. The challenge we have, particularly in social housing, I think, is that people have other battles to fight, and often remembering to wipe down a little bit of mould around the shower cubicles or around window reveals is not at the top of the list of things to deal with that week. And that's why the problems build and so on, because it's quite frankly not a priority. It wouldn't be for me either in a lot of those situations. So I think risk always sits in a list of priorities in any situation, and sometimes mould is, you know, down the list of things to worry about if you're trying to put food on the table or heat your home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, having, I guess, a bit of mold in the kitchen sink or in the toilets is something acceptable. We all have it, okay?
Yeah.
And probably, but if that bit of mold get uncomfortable and then suddenly you have in the whole wall, that is something that you need to try to prevent. Now, we have done some research, some of my colleagues, on acceptable levels of mold spores in air. And it's a quite difficult question to answer too. So one of our PhD students and one of my colleagues is there trying to benchmark mold spores in air. And probably you can do it if you compare, and probably we're going to be able to do it actually, if you compare clean houses, I mean, you don't have any visual mold, but still you have many mold spores in air, and houses that are contaminated. So you can see the different levels of mold spore in air. But the issue is you may have a house that has really low levels of visible mold, but actually you don't know the species, and that species, probably a few spores of that species, could be more complex than a lot of spores of another type of mold species. And this is where the whole conversation became quite difficult. So a bit of something could be quite dangerous for a particular individual with a particular health condition.
Yeah.
And that is something that we don't know yet. I don't think there is enough research that can tell you that. We know which one are the species that are more complex for humans, but there are so many there. And this is something that we don't know yet. And another thing that when I said about the species, that I said in my presentation, I gave the example of, I just mentioned that every year you see in the news a new species of lizard or a new species of plants or anything that is discovering somewhere in the world in an exotic island in the Caribbean, I don't know. And then suddenly you have a new species that haven't been detected. We were not aware that existed. So imagine with mold, how many are there that still we don't know?
Yeah. Interesting. And what is it about mold that does us harm? Do you know? I mean, because you've got the mold spores, which can provide allergic reactions to things. But you also have mycotoxins as well that are released, that VOCs or I think we call them MVOCs or something, that are effectively producing gases that causes harm as well. Is that the limit to the harm? Is it basically the spores and the toxins that are released?
The mycotoxin that they've released, and they've released these mycotoxins to fight other microorganisms. It's not to fight us.
Okay.
And yeah, if we get in contact with those, and I guess at different levels, they can affect us.
So the mycotoxins are often it's a competing thing that they're trying to outcompete other species.
Especially other species. Yeah. This is what they do. Now, one thing and there's plenty of research in terms of how mold can affect health. But I think one area that we haven't really looked in enough detail is the mental health effect of mold. And I think I want to mention this because, I mean, we are doing a literature review at the moment to try to understand what is in the literature related to mental health. What are the main mental health conditions or psychological conditions that have been reported in the literature related to mold. But also for me is more interesting that what is the method that all the researchers have used to actually see that link between mental health or psychological health and mold.
Yeah.
So how do you have really assess that relationship? What kind of method or questionnaire or, I don't know, experimental work you have done to try to say, yeah, there is a link between the two of them?
And you've obviously, I'm guessing, scanned that literature. What's your sense of it when you look at it? There's obviously enough there to have a look at it.
I mean, we're still working on it. So far, we have found when we talk about mental health, actually there are some conditions, and then I also mentioned psychological health is because of psychological conditions, because what we have found that researchers have reported on depression, on anxiety, on sleep depression, and on cognitive performance. So those are the four main areas that researchers have reported that are linked to mold. Now, what we have found is that in many of the reports, there's not much information about how that, the method that have used actually to link the two. And this is what I am really interested, because at the moment, I want to go in another direction, which is try to understand the mental health and mold. We are developing a proposal at the moment to look at that. So this literature review was done to inform actually our proposal and our methods. So really, you want to use a method that is a standard method or something that has been validated.
And I imagine there must be an awful lot of confounding factors in a lot of that research, particularly if you're trying to look at if it's at an epidemiological level, it must be very difficult to get the numbers to draw meaning from it. If it's at a case level, you've got the confounding factors of, the environment, the other, because often if you've got damp and mold present, you might have other air pollutants present as well. And we know there's some of those trigger cognitive attacks and mental health problems. So I imagine it's a really messy picture.
It is complex. Yeah, it is really complex.
Do you know if there's any kind of direct toxicological evidence that mold spores or mycotoxins are actually creating a physiological or mental response in some way? Because that's the kind of the straight line stuff, isn't it? We say the exposure to X creates a symptom of Y. That's where it gets easier. But when you start moving it into the environment, where it's is it the lighting, is it the fact that I'm, let's face it, if you lived in a damp and moldy bedroom, you're going to be pretty depressed about that environment anyway. Yeah. Whether or not the mold is having a confounding impact on that or not. That's a really hard one to unpack, I imagine.
It is complex. It is really complex. And as you said before, probably a family that cannot heat their home, that is going to be their bed. Or
other stress in their life, or all sorts of things. Yeah.
But how would you just detach that from just mold? And that is when it became super complex.
Yeah. Yeah, as I was just talking to Pavel yesterday about, even trying to untangle the basic indoor environmental quality stuff from air quality, the impact of noise and light and sound in amongst air quality on things like cognitive performance. Like, we really are at the frontier of understanding the combined effects of all of this stuff. It's a really hard space to navigate through. And often a lot of the tests that we've got to determine things like cognitive performance can be pretty woolly, for doing score testing at the end of the workday and things like that. Not the most ideal. So it's a really interesting space. Ultimately, I suppose, and as a practitioner in the space often, I don't care too much in some ways. What matters is the result. And if people are struggling with mental health because they're in damp and mouldy conditions, or they're in damp and mouldy conditions and they have mental health challenges, it makes some sense to sort out the damp and mold. It's a non-harm intervention in that sense, that it's not going to make a situation any worse by improving someone's indoor environment.
Absolutely.
So it's a very low-risk approach to try and mitigate a risk.
Yeah, but what you need, you need to understand that if you're going to improve the built environment, what kind of improvement are you going to propose and do. So you may think that you're going to improving probably and making a huge effort to try to do it. Maybe it's not the solution. So this is why, you need this kind of research. Now, for me, not having that kind of information is great. There's more research, more crazy ideas, more discussion with the students, more discussion with colleagues. And this is one thing get quite interesting for me and exciting. Dealing with all the discipline is something that I really love.
Yeah.
So as an architect going to microbiology, then it's just something with a whole journey, but a journey that I'm enjoying quite a lot. And going to health also, it's fascinating.
I think that's the fundamentally exciting part of indoor environmental science at the moment, is the multidisciplinary nature of it. That we were just bringing in more and more disciplines into this sector and opening up more and more avenues and joining more and more dots. That's where the game is at.
Yeah,
I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, we talk about mold. Then what is the main driver of mold? Humidity, moisture in buildings, water. Where the water come from? Then how we have removed that water, but ventilation, and in the whole area of ventilation, there's so much to do research into. So that kind of really, for me, is the beauty of working in research and developing methodologies to actually answer those kind of simple but really complex questions.
Yeah. And for me, in a way, it's quite analogous to some of the conversations I've had on the air chemistry side of air quality as well, is that there's just this expansive area of research and knowledge acquisition going on in that, and the joining of different disciplines. So it's incredible. So from people coming into this field, there's a lifetime of potential learning and business, and it's just a phenomenal space to be in. I can't emphasize that enough. But the beauty of what we're often doing when we're trying to deliver better outcomes is we have to condense all of that complexity through the conduit of a home, let's say. And in that space, there are only so many levers we can pull to engineer a better outcome. So you have to kind of squeeze all this complexity, and you could spend. It's similar to me to the sustainability question in the early days. There was an organisation called the Natural Step that kind of put it really well, and that was that you could spend the next 20 years being like a rabbit in the headlights at the just sheer complexity of what sustainability is. You could pick a fight on batteries or solar panels and fight there for the rest of your days if you wanted to. Or you could broadly agree that resources are diminishing, demand is increasing, and somehow we've got to find our way through this funnel to whatever sustainability looks like. We won't know what that is until we get there, but we agree on the direction of travel. Similarly, for the built environment in let's say housing, we've got all this complexity of damp and mould and air chemistry and so on. But at the end of the day, these are people's homes where the mechanisms for dealing with damp and mould, and we'll come on to this, moisture balance, is there's effectively three drivers for mould in your home. That's the presence of moisture, presence of food for mould, and a temperature that it can grow in.
Yeah.
Right? Everything else is going to be a given. You will have mould spores. So the only levers that we have at our disposal to control this problem is those three conditions. How do we control those three conditions? And I think you put this really well in your talks, and the UKCMB, which we'll definitely come on to later, I think really coined this term moisture balance, that at the end of the day, we are always going to have food available for mould to grow in homes, aren't we? And we're likely to always want to have a building at a temperature that mould likes to grow in, or the species that we're talking about. So there's only really one lever here, and that's the moisture piece, isn't it?
It is. No, it is. This is the most important one. And in terms of temperature, as you said, nutrients is full of nutrients. The whole, the materials, building materials, and even dust and And our skin, I mean, we all shed a lot of pieces of skin, millions of them, every second or every minute, I don't know, remember. And those aren't there, they get stuck on surfaces. And that is perfect condition and nutrient for mold to start and feed from there. But as you said, water is the most important. And going back to the moisture balance, I think that it is a really important concept. So homes are in constant movement, they're never static. It's going to depend on the conditions outside, it's going to depend on the conditions inside, it's going to depend on the building envelope. And but if you get to one extreme, which is too much moisture at a particular time or for a longer period of time, what you're going to have, you may have a problem with mold growing. And you're right. I mean, moisture is the most important one. And in terms of temperature, indoor temperature is ideal for mold. Well, probably not ideal, but is in a range to actually allow the development.
Yeah. I'm guessing with mold, there's some species flourishing colder and warmer. I mean, there's probably a spectrum is there. So the stuff that we see is the stuff that enjoys the environments that we create for it. But as that changes, I mean, is things like global warming, do you think, gonna have an impact on that? If we're subtly shifting the ambient temperature, how we manage spaces, are we going to see different species or species?
I believe we're going to see different species.
Yeah, interesting.
Talking with, I forgot his name, a professor from Imperial College. I should remember his name. We're just discussing about how mold can adapt. So I'm pretty sure as climate change is happening and conditions are changing, we're going to have a new species for sure. But also probably existing species, they're going to adapt to whatever new conditions we have indoors. Now we're going to have a change in temperatures, a change in probably more rains, more humid environments, or probably more rain penetration. I don't know. I mean, many things can happen, but certainly, I mean, mold, they're not going to go away.
No.
We may have more, we may have less, no idea. New species, probably species that today they're not of concern, and at some point they're going to become of concern. No idea.
Yeah. I keep thinking of The Last of Us, Netflix. When we're talking about that.
You know what is really funny about that series is that I was as I said, I was looking at mold for many years, and then suddenly I saw my son playing this game, and I thought, well, that is quite weird. And he mentioned that actually with this about mold, and this is when I went to look at this particular species, Cordyceps, which is the one that get on the bodies of insects
and things. Yeah,
exactly. And it's amazing how actually that series, that program, it is based on something that is real, is happening.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. It's quite,
Did you see the opening sequence for the guy being interviewed where he was saying what is your biggest fear? And he was saying, people were saying about viruses and pandemics. He was going, no, not that, no fungi. And he was explaining that, these cordyceps, at the moment they require too high a temperature, but if something were to, this was kind of back in the 60s and 70s ago, if something were to happen, I don't know, like the earth was to warm by a few degrees, all of a sudden you could find that species adapting, and it was really, really ominously, but it was brilliantly done.
Yeah. No, I haven't.
Yeah.
But today I just saw one of.
I'll send you the link. I'll put the link to the YouTube video in the podcast notes for people to freak out. It's a brilliant sequence. It's one of the. They have a couple of in the television adaptation to it. They have a couple of sequences that became quite popular. One of them is that interview where he's kind of saying, "Look." They were laughing because it wasn't a problem. It seemed ludicrous. He was saying, look, the Earth would only have to heat by 2 or 3 degrees, and that could be a problem. And then 30 years later, we're talking about global warming. So it made it very ominous and very real sounding. Yeah, and then the other one was the lady who's a cordyceps expert gets called into the first of the infections, and she's sitting there after having discovered that this is a cordyceps in the brain, and it's in Malaysia or somewhere like that, and the chief of the army is saying, well, what do we do? And she says, bomb. You need to bomb the city. There's no vaccine. This is it. We're done. And she says, I want to go home now. And it's just like, whoa. And that's the start of The Last of Us. That was the movies, the television. It's really well done, actually. I haven't. I put links to it.
I think this is an HBO, no?
HBO, yeah. It's on Sky or something.
Pretty sure. I mean, it's in my to-do list of things that I need to.
It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think for a couple of sleepless nights, those 2 YouTube videos will get everybody going. Anyway, we massively digress as always, Hector. I think that it's interesting to talk about moisture balance because, again, moisture in buildings is something that we tend to talk about in quite a binary nature. You know, the building's too humid, or the relative humidity is too high, or it isn't, and so on. But I'm now been on the pedestal ever since UKCMB kind of coined the term of this moisture balance concept, and this recognition that every building and every space is probably going to have a different balance point. Mm-hmm. You know, there are these things that interact with that moisture balance, you know, the fabric, the systems, the people and their activities, all these things are having this impact on this, where this balance point sits. And depending on how occupied your home is, how much volume it has, the efficiencies of the materials, every building is going to have a slightly different point at which that building's in a healthy balance. And you shift one element of those factors and you can have an impact on the others. You know, so the example would be something simple like you improve the temperature of the home by reducing drafts, but now you've reduced the overall ventilation rate, which allows, so you've increased the surface temperatures, but you've also now increased the vapor loading in the building. And now the building is, by fixing one, you've shifted it out of balance. So I think it's a great way of describing nuance balance, because it isn't the fixed thing. It isn't an either or.
Yeah.
Each build, and it will evolve over time as families grow up and leave and chat. You get you get teenagers, and they now introduce unbelievable amounts of moisture into the property.
They bring friends.
You know, you have bedrooms,
boyfriends,
four or five people in there overnight on sleepovers and things like that. So like it's unbelievable how a building will evolve as a family evolves.
Yeah, no, that's true. But when you said, bring kids to the home and it's sleepovers, etc. That is changing the balance of the building. It's going to go in one direction, but that is going to, next day, when kids leave, actually the house is going to be in balance again. So, but what I was saying before is when they balance out or the house get unbalanced for a longer period of time is when we may have a problem. And mold is the one that is telling you, listen, there is too much water here. This is what I'm growing. So, but for that to happen, because the temperature usually are not really high for mold to develop really quick. So actually you have many days, weeks, or even a month when mold is going to start to grow of that unbalance.
Yeah. Somebody was talking to me the other day about kind of acute and chronic conditions, which I thought was quite an interesting lens.
What, sorry? What did you say?
Acute and chronic. So a good example of that would be if you have a water leak. So if you saturate a surface, there's a good chance within a few days you'll start to get mold, right? If you saturate a surface within a short period of time, you can create conditions for mold to grow. So you need to fix the leak, and if it doesn't need repairing, if you can dry it out, great. But if you can't, you might need to cut out damaged plasterboard and so on. But if you saturate a substrate, you can get mold growing pretty rapidly. Whereas if it's a surface temperature problem, or where you're getting surface condensation or vapor loading in the space, it's more of a chronic. It builds up over time. It starts to appear. Whereas a leak is quite an acute event that happens, And if you don't deal with it, you've basically created a saturated surface for mold to grow. I thought I don't know if it's a perfectly true analogy, but I think it's an interesting one in the sense that, because we know certainly from evidence that one of the most common reasons for mold in properties is physical moisture. From leaks, whether that's from outside to inside or from plumbing leaks, say, that physically saturating a surface with water is a pretty good way of getting damp and mold in a space.
Yeah, I mean, it seems right. Okay.
Yeah.
But also, if you have a leak that you can spot straight away, even if the materials are completely wet, I guess if you have a dry environment, that material is going to dry out in a probably short period of time.
Yeah.
Unless you have too much water, even behind the material, let's say a wall, insulation, or the kind of building material behind, and everything is completely saturated. So actually, you don't have enough time for that to dry out. Probably that is going to generate a problem. Yeah, but usually, I mean, probably what I will say is that if you have something, let's say a pipe that's broken and timber or wood that get wet, probably you're going to have another type of effects. I mean, some kind of changes on the material structure more than mold growth straight away.
Yeah,
so this is another thing that really we don't consider too much. Is we talk about temperature, nutrients, humidity, but there is a really important point, which is a parameter, which is time. For mold to grow, you need time. And if you look at there is some kind of graph that is called isoplex. I don't know if you have seen them.
No, I didn't have.
So you have one axis relative humidity and the other one temperature. And you can see that a different temperature combination with humidity, mold is going to take a certain amount of time to germinate, or when the spore just crack and start the hypha or the mycelium to grow. And then a certain amount of time for the mycelium to develop and start to grow in millimeters per day. So time is really important here. It's not that, let's say, I put that glass of water here on that wall and straight away I want to have mold. No, that is not going to happen at all.
There's a germination period.
There's a germination period. So you have a spore, probably that this wall is full of spores. And then if you get proper condition, that spore is going to crack. We're talking about micro, really tiny things. So crack, and then it's going to start to expand. So if you look, it's really beautiful how they look like. I mean, a hypha is like an arm that starts to the growth. And then the hypha became a mycelium, which is all this structure, wide structure. And for the mycelium growth and for germination growth, you need specific environmental conditions, okay? Time, but also for sporulation, which is actually when the mold start to produce more spores, that are the ones that are going to be released, and which is the black thing that you see. So when you see a surface which is black, it's because it's millions and millions of spores, and some mold just release the spore naturally. Another one is just when you remove it with moving of air. So so time is something that is just critical here. So this is what when someone called you and said, "Wow, you know what? I have a wall that is full, completely covered with mold." I just said, "Okay, oh my God!" I mean, to get to that point, there has been weeks of proper conditions.
Yeah. But sometimes, those conditions, if a wall is damaged or there's a leak or something, is not an insignificant problem to solve, is it?
Absolutely.
Challenge. Yeah.
And this is why, I mean, understanding what is the root cause of mold is something quite critical.
Yeah.
Because there's not just, let's clean it. Yeah, simple. But why is causing this mold? Is it because of this, as you said, break of a pipe or some kind of source of water from outside? Or is this ambient humidity? So having that kind of diagnostic is quite critical, because then you know what to do.
I'd like to borrow your attention for just a moment to discuss ACO, a partner of this podcast. ACO, an EI company, specialises in pioneering new technologies in fire, carbon monoxide alarms, and Internet of Things technology. Many know them as the go-to company for these products. In fact, this year, they're celebrating 35 years in business. I particularly know them for their outstanding work in the housing sector with their HomeLink offerings, aiming to solve some of the industry's most serious challenges. The technology incorporates environmental sensors and a gateway to offer connected home solutions, which has a proven track record in helping landlords reduce operational costs and carbon emissions while improving residents' well-being and safety. Issues at the heart of the housing sector, like damp and mould, fuel poverty, and energy efficiency, are all in the crosshairs of ACO. I've been amazed at how they are innovating here, with a laser focus on unpacking some of the complex nature of these challenges in a way that answers the what next question we so desperately need at the moment. They have a great network of experts and installers. If you're in housing, they are definitely worth talking to. Trusted is an overused word, but not here. Ask around, and ACO are synonymous with it. Details are in the show notes and at airqualitymatters.net and at ACO. That's aico.co.uk. Now, back to the podcast.
Yeah, well, you should know what to do.
It's like breaking out in spots. You know you're not eating well and sleeping well. It's a visible sign that I'm not looking after myself. My skin has decided to tell me that I'm unhealthy.
Well, it's the same when you wake up in the morning. Let's say one of your kids wake up in the morning with a bit of temperature.
Yeah.
And then you said, well, something is not right.
Yeah.
What? You don't know. It could be an infection. It could be a tooth. It could be, I don't know. It could be tummy. It could be anything. Too tired. No idea. So how did you know as such? So that fever, temperature, the thing that could be mold is telling you something in the body of this person, this individual is wrong. But what exactly, we don't know. You know that something is wrong. So let's try to take you to the GP, and GP is going to be able to tell you what is happening.
Yeah.
So this is what I was saying. I mean, doing a proper diagnostic, then you can resolve the problem in such a way that mold is not going to occur again. What are you thinking now?
Yeah, the diagnostic thing is an interesting one. There's a couple of questions that come to mind to me about the diagnostic part of it. That there's the diagnostic element, which is there's something wrong with the building. The building is out of balance. Who are the right people to have those conversations with? Because the things that cause that imbalance are quite widespread. It often falls between different disciplines, between ventilation people, surveyors, damp and mould organisations, rising damp companies. You know, that it's been quite a split sector for a long time, and I think in the diagnosis of the whole, we've often been applying specialists in one element of it, who may or may not be incentivized to sell all their solutions or not, you know, and I think everybody's aware of those problems. But I think there's a challenge in that correction of moisture balance in buildings, that sometimes the right people aren't engaged. My feeling is, and I was speaking to somebody a few weeks ago about it, that it's a bit like general practitioner. It's a generalist you need in the first instance that's going to look at the whole. So surveyors, those kind of professions that aren't coming in from a particular angle, but are going to look at the problem as a whole, and then root cause, and maybe hand off to a specialist if they need to, a bit like a general practitioner would do. But the second part of that diagnostics, and I only having this conversation yesterday, first thing a GP generally does for a general problem is send off for bloods. You know, go and do a test to figure out what it is he's looking at. There's the symptoms part, which is what he's presented with, which is a bit like for the building. But at some point you go and do a test and figure out, what's actually out of kilter. Is it a virus? Is it bacterial infection? Is it X, Y, or Z? We struggle with that with mould, don't we? It's a hard thing to measure. Where are we these days with diagnostics of mold spores in airs or swab tests of mold on surface or in dust? Like if you want to know if you've got a mold problem and it may not be that visible, is there a way for you currently to be able to determine whether there's an unhealthy amount of mold in the air? Because you look at mold all the time and culture it and all this kind of stuff, but like, can you put a device? Is there like an air quality monitor as it stands today?
I mean, if we put a petri dish,
yeah,
with any kind of agar, an agar where mold is going to grow in this table for the next half an hour, then we close it, put it in the incubator. But sure, tomorrow something's going to be growing there. So as I said, mold is everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, I guess in terms of the diagnostic of why mold is growing, my assumption is that a surveyor should understand straight away if it's there is, for example, leak of water. This guy, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'm not familiar with the surveyor environment, but I'm pretty sure they will be able to say, yes, I mean, this is a pipe that was broken there, or probably some kind of rain penetration or something. It's not always that simple, but I guess the surveyor has the expertise to do that. The complex things come when what if it's not from an external source of water? What if it's because of moisture production? When? So let's say you come to this room, there is mold there, and you're going to ask me, I called you because there is mold, and you said, yeah, but when did you first spot this? I don't know, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. The thing is, I talk about time. So when that mold really started to develop was long before I called you. So do we have the correct understanding or to understand on what happened, let's say a month ago or 3 months ago? What were the conditions within the building? Because what you said, ventilation, heating, yeah, but what exactly happened at the time?
Is this a thing that comes every winter?
Yeah, well,
that kind
exactly.
of thing. Yeah.
So this is what I think is not just the diagnostic that you do in the day that you visit the property, but it's also try to understand what happened before, how the building is used, what were the external conditions at the time that when mold may have started to develop. You can do some kind of I haven't really looked at diagnostic. I mean, we did a project with one of a company to try to develop a diagnostic, and we developed a really good way of monitoring the building, and through analyzing different parameters, you can tell what could be the cause: lack of ventilation, lack of proper heating, or too much moisture production. Okay, and the final one is the envelope, or a combination of all of them. But what I think was missing on the project was understanding what happened before, understanding how the building is used. The monitor is going to give you really good data, but I don't think that is enough.
Yeah.
Because of time is not considered in that equation.
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing with the longitudinal monitoring that you're getting with devices like ACO and switches and others, is that they're starting to capture that time-orientated process of a building changing in its use or its character or its heating profiles and so on. So you can start to see from patterns what might be driving that final outcome and maybe catch it at the point it's crossing thresholds that are going to cause damper mold. And I think that's the exciting thing about that sector, is looking at that broader environmental data. What about at the other side of it, where people are saying, look, I'm being caused harm by damp and mold? Are we able to speciate through tests different molds? If
there is a company that
so you can now, you can do a test in a home and say, yes, it's this particular species of mold, and we know this causes X, Y.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what I was mentioning before, this PhD student and one of my colleagues, that we have been working in this benchmarking mold. Part of the benchmark is also understanding. It's not just to tell you how many mold spores you have in air, but also identifying the species. Because of what I was telling you before, you may have just a few mold spores in air that, in principle, should be the normal levels without understanding what, they still define what is normal, but it could be that there are those species of mold that could harm your health.
Yeah. I had Brandon Chapo on from Change the Air Foundation in the States. They run a lobbying organization on damp and mold in the States, because it's a big problem there. And they've got different climate zones there as well, where it presents very different mold challenges to others. But the reason he got involved in it was he was very heavily affected by mold before he started off this foundation, and got very sick from it. In some of his blood tests that were being done, they were finding levels of chemicals that were associated with transplants. So that there's a medicine that you take which stops your body from rejecting organs. So it's like an anti-immune chemical. And they were asking him questions, where you had a kidney transplant or something. He's going, no, had nothing. And it turned out, when they speciated, eventually it turned out he had massive problems with mold in his apartment complex. And one of the toxins that this mold produces was this chemical that is an immune suppressant. And it was a high enough levels in his body that they thought he was taking medication for suppressing the immune system. And that was one of the triggers for a lot of his illnesses, was effectively lack of immunity. So I think it's really interesting when you get to the point where you're saying, well, I'm getting these chronic conditions, and I'm not quite sure why. The question often isn't asked at a medical level, what about your home life? Is there something in your environment that you might be exposed to? And it just so happened, after many years, one doctor said to him, tell me this isn't a good story for mold in your property. Have you got mold? He went, as it happens, yes. And she said, I see at least one patient a fortnight presenting like you that turns out it's mold. And, they're doing a lot of work, Change the Air Foundation in the States, looking at that. But they put a lot of focus on the air tests and speciating tests to figure out what it is, the diagnosing the type of mold, because I think they're associating certain molds with certain conditions very specifically, which I think is interesting.
It's interesting. I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, you presented is interesting for sure. Now that we're mentioning about the mold, it's funny. Just as an anecdote, that when I was studying architecture, I used to live in a basement. And it got contaminated with mold, a lot of mold. My knowledge about mold was none. And but what I found was how lucky I was living in this room with all this black thing that were growing on the walls. And my first approach wasn't to clean it; it was actually to paint them around and to make some kind of drawing, some kind of artistic thing. And actually, after many months, I was diagnosed with some kind of asthma. So I needed to leave that space. But it wasn't because, what the doctor told me wasn't about the mold, it was about a humid environment. Okay? Yeah. So that, for me, was quite important, because I think we don't know much about mold, and people at home, many residents, they don't really understand what mold. And in this country, we have a lot of people coming from abroad. And they bring their own experiences, and I don't think they're really informed. They don't really know how to use the building in this country. So yeah, information to tenants, to residents. Understanding more what is the problem. I think that is quite critical.
Yeah, that multicultural element to it, I think, is really interesting.
It is.
I was talking to Practical Shweta in India, and she was saying, at certain times of year in certain parts of India, mold is a real problem, and it's always the monsoon season, and it's not because of the levels of background humidity. It's just the fact that when you get that much rain,
of course,
it's going to find the weak spots in your home. And she says every monsoon season, you're just waiting for the damp spots to start appearing, and you try and keep on top of it, but you just drench a building with that much water, it will find its way in, and then every year you get the problems with the mold. So it's less an environment, because the buildings are quite open, it's less an environmental problem.
No, but
it's just purely...
But you have the nutrients.
Yeah.
You have the water, but also probably over there, you have even better temperature condition, because it's warmer than what we have here. I mean, we think that indoor environments are quite warm, but usually between, 20, 22 degrees Celsius. But over there, probably are even higher, which is perfect for mold. Yeah,
what temperatures you stick in the Petri dishes in?
Well, usually you put it above 25, 30 degrees Celsius. Because again, if you look at the isoplast, the perfect temperatures, I think it's 30, but depend on the species. It's closer to 30. I mean, really warm.
Yeah. So if you've got really warm, humid conditions in the tropics, for example, it's just ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another interesting element, and certainly something that I've learned over the last few years, is how the different regions just totally flip the building physics on its head as well. So we have a pattern in my worldview of condensation, damp and mold is born out of living in this part of the world, which is every winter in the heating season, where you're getting cold surfaces and you're closing buildings down, and that's our mold season here. But if you go to the tropics, it's a totally different game that's being played. That it's air-conditioned spaces, it's interstitial condensation being driven from the outside in, not the inside out. It's vapor barriers in different parts. It's a completely different set of build. But it's the same concept of moisture balance. Ultimately, there's a healthy balance point for that building, that if you're conditioning a space where it's 35 degrees and a 78% humidity outside, and you've got 24 degrees at low humidity inside, you're creating some really big imbalances. And you could cause these problems.
Yeah. I mean, mold is a huge issue everywhere. It's not just in this country.
Yeah.
And, in Asia, in Australia, South America, many African countries, they have the problem. So it's everywhere. It's not just our problem. And, and this is where we start to talk about the species. Probably over there, they have all the type of species that are more, they probably are more happy growing over there than the species that we have here. And I haven't seen any research on that area, to be honest. I haven't really looked at species according to different parts of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it? So what's your kind of, I mean, there's no doubt about it. From the, and you've been involved in writing moisture standards, in building regulations for Part F. You've been involved in housing and moisture for years. I think you, as well as any, has a good sense of the challenge we've got with our building stock to move it in the right direction. What's your hope for the next kind of 5 or 10 year block when it comes to moisture in buildings? We've had the death of a child, which is about the most tragic outcome that you can get in the death of Arabishak. We've had the subsequent laws coming in and the government focus on this problem, and we've kind of gone through this period of recognizing we've got a problem, part of the problem, I'd say. And we kind of started that process of shifting the governance and the stock condition surveys and trying to map out quite how big a challenge we've got. But we're now into this phase now where quite big organisations that are managing quite a lot of housing are now going to have to do something about it. We've gone from the recognising we've got a problem, figuring out quite how big a problem we've got, and saying that we're going to do something about it. We're now in this phase now of actually delivering in some way. What's your kind of hope for that next block? Where do you think that traction's going to come from? Because it's a big problem, isn't it? You've got years of underinvestment in stock. It's a complex problem to solve. It's both building physics and social science and communication. It's a really big problem to solve.
I mean, more than a problem, I think it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge that I feel that more organizations have taken positively. And I mean, the same that happened with Grenfell Tower. I mean, there were many issues there, and obviously it shouldn't have happened, but it happened. And things that had happened, actually, things have changed quite a lot from a risk point of view, from the way in which we build, from the way of which the security of the building, health and safety, etc. I think coming from a country where we have earthquakes, where every time that you have an earthquake, something is going to fall, then you learn from that. Okay. I started to work with mold and do research in mold in 2006. And for many years, I mean, nobody was talking about mold until the boy died in 2020. And then suddenly, unfortunately, I mean, the government realized, the institution realized that we are doing something really wrong. And the good thing is that we have a law, local authorities and housing providers, they know what to do, what to have to do. I think the residents are getting more information. I think there have been a peak of, we know that we have a problem and we need to solve it. So I'm really positive for the next 5 years. I mean, from a research point of view, it's great. There's a lot more that we need to do. We're working with local authorities trying to understand in which way we can help them, not just from a UKCMB point of view, but more from a research point of view. So there are some local authorities that really wants to do research, and through research help their tenants and residents, which I think is fantastic. And we're working with the local authorities trying to understand what are the best practices and how those best practices can be implemented in other regions and other locations. So I think I'm super positive about when it's going to happen. I think, as I was saying, every time there are earthquakes, you don't want an earthquake, you don't want people to die, you don't want things to fall. But thanks to that, in some way, it seems that we as a human, we realize, oops, we have a problem. I mean, all this can be resolved and could be prevented, but we don't, I mean, as a human, this is not our nature.
No.
Until something happened to you is when you really realize that we need to react. Same with COVID. I mean, come on. I mean, we knew that something was coming. And there was research on indoor quality and infection disease transmission and how what do you have to deal? And then suddenly arrives here and we're completely overwhelmed. It's like, oops.
Yeah.
And how? I mean, come on. Years of research, developed country struggling with something that could have been prevented in some way. So what? Have we learned the lesson? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, from an indoor quality, come on. This was the COVID. It was a big driver of let's understand indoor quality, let's understand ventilation, which is great. It is really great for the area, etc. But from a human point of view, do we really understand that? I mean, I go to I take the underground every morning, and you see people just sneezing and coughing, and how they don't realize that actually they are sick and they're just spreading everything that they have.
Well, you're asking big questions about human nature there that I'm nowhere near qualified to answer. But you're right. I think I'm probably in the middle as a realist. I've asked this question of guests quite a bit, particularly ones that were very heavily involved in COVID, whether if they were writing the book from an air quality perspective, would they have had COVID or not? Because it's an interesting question to ask people, because the thousands of deaths aside, you know, I'm not saying anybody wants a global pandemic, but
of course
it asks the question, was it ultimately for the good from an awareness perspective, or was it a distraction? Like, were we making meaningful, broad progress before it, and this came along, set false expectations, false precedents, and was so violent in its impact on society that the human instinct has been just to try and forget about it as fast as possible. You know, that there's that I was having an interesting conversation with a lady called Plum Stone. She'll be on the podcast before this one's released, actually, for listeners, so they're probably aware of this from the conversation. But she was from a family that has had long COVID. She had a husband that was vulnerable because of a long-term kidney illness and things. So COVID's not over for them. So when there was Freedom Day here in the UK, that stung for them because in fact it made it worse for them because kids could go back to school infected now and so on. So the reaction, and it's struck me because I'm probably like many where you've had a bit of a sniffle in the last couple of years and you've gone, I don't want to know. That I'm just not, I don't want to stick another swab up my nose to find out whether I've got COVID or not, which is bad on me. But like, I think a lot of people have been in that boat, that it was a traumatic enough COVID in their lives that we're kind of glad to see the back of it. But there's a whole community of people with long-term illnesses, disease and so on, where it's not. And like you say, people on I'm not quite sure we're back to the badge of honor of turning up to the office absolutely hanging with cold and flu, but I don't think we're far off it.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, come on, man up, come to the office, it's only a cold. We may be not far back off being back to that, which I think is a shame. So
no, but you can come back to the office, but use a mask, like some kind of protection, or if you're going to use a room, tell the people around you, I'm sick. Yeah, so you don't mind using another room, or let's open the window. I mean, things that seems to be quite basic and people should have understood, and I don't think they have.
And I wonder, my concern is for the moisture balance, damp and mold question. You'd hope that a death of a child and a law is enough, and that there's going to be good progress. But I think people will forget. I think my biggest concern for damp and mold in housing is this, actually, that it is an erosion of trust piece. So damp and mold has been highlighted. A lot of housing organisations have written to tenants, made it a very big deal that they're going to deal with damp and mold. They've got these policies and reaction times and so on baked into the law. But as we've been discussing here today, damp and mould isn't necessarily an eradicable problem, and certainly not in the short term. So the way human nature works is you highlight damp and mould, something is done this year, this next winter it comes back again, but they only fixed the fans and did that last year. This year they might replace the windows and do something else, and then next year it comes back again. And over a period of time, that trust is eroded. All that action and effort over the next 2 or 3 years somehow gets eroded with time, introducing this time element to mould again. That's my concern, is that because this is such a big problem and a nuanced problem, that the one thing we can guarantee is that for the vast majority of people, mould is going to come back again next year.
Absolutely.
Right. But that's not the way the problem is being presented. The problem being presented that this is a serious problem that we're taking seriously and we'll deal with it within 48 hours and show that we've dealt with it and now it's gone. And I think that's the challenge, because what happens in that environment is at scale, people just go, yeah, we've heard it all before. Mould was here last winter, it was here. You're not doing anything about it. And I think that's the big challenge for me, is that how do we set society up for the recognition, a bit like the net zero challenge in a way, that this is a 2050 problem. Realistically, it's not a 2026 problem. But that's damp and mould in the built environment for me. Is this something we can get the handle on in the next 25 years if we start to do this properly? Or are somehow we going to be able to put into place mechanisms that this is solved by 2030? Like this is something, by changing what we do as a housing provider, we fix this problem in the next 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure that's possible, because so much we don't have the resources, we don't have the people, and the scale of the problem is big enough that we're going to have to tie many buildings into journeys and tie them into other works programs, retrofit and general maintenance and reactive maintenance and so on, that this is a long burn problem to solve. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a long term, but at the same time, I feel that we're doing stuff. I mean, I don't want to be that negative. I mean, I'm in general super negative with human beings because we don't learn lessons. But not negative with human beings, but I mean, yeah. I don't want it. I mean, that for people to have that impression. But I'm really positive about people. And I think for what I have seen from the many local authorities and housing providers, they really care. They're really making a huge effort. It's a huge effort because it's not simple, because our housing stock is not, it is old and needs a lot of work. There are not enough resources. You just said there are probably not enough people that is well prepared. Many times they face challenges because residents, even though they recognize that they have a problem, they don't really want to be helped. They said, I need help, but actually they don't want to collaborate. So the problem is a lot more complex, not that simple. But what I have seen these last couple of years is that a huge effort from many people and people that really care, which has been extremely positive for me. Yeah, and extremely encouraging for what we are doing. So with the UKCMB, if at any point we see that actually nobody cares, so what we continue with the UKCMB, what we continue doing research in this area, if actually just for the sake of publications, no. Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that we do with with our students, my colleagues, is stuff that actually may have an impact. And this is what really drives us. Yeah. But at some point, our research is going to be able to be, people's going to use it in industry, in the public, etc. All the links that we have with industry is because of that. We want to help.
No, I think you're right. And that, you know, if for those of us that have been around this sector for long enough, there's definitely a gear change that's commensurate with the scale of the problem. That it'll be sustaining that effort. That'll be the challenge. I think that's the key. But you're right. I mean, so many organizations are trying to do the right thing, and you know, housing gets about. We talk about social housing, but the reason we talk about social housing so much is because there's at least an organization that manages and is responsible for large swathes of the stock. So they're an easy target in that sense, that not both negative and positive. They're an easy target to blame, but also they're an easy target because changes in their patterns and processes can have impacts on large swathes of the stock.
So
dealing with this problem in the private rented sector, or even worse in the privately owned sector, is a problem that we have no idea how to solve.
We don't have an idea. You're right.
It's because it's you instead of dealing with several hundred authorities, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of homeowners.
Yeah, but I have attended some presentations and events where actually you see those private owners, and you see a lot of people that really care too.
Yeah, you and I both actually were up in I can't remember whether it was the Suffolk Renters. So Suffolk Renters was a really good example.
Yeah. So seeing that, I think is again, it's encouraging. It's something that you see that there is a positive change, that mold is being recognized now as an issue that needs effort from the housing provider, but also from tenants. It's just both of them.
And there's tools and far more tools and organisations available to people than there were 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll come on to the UKCMB, but you've got Healthy Buildings and all sorts of organisations really trying to provide the resources and tools for people. How did you find yourself here doing what you do, Hector? You saying you were looking at moulding buildings in Chile, I think.
No, not at all.
Years ago.
No. What happened is I did a master's degree here in the UK in a school of architecture, but it was about energy and environmental design. So it was quite broad, but I was always extremely interested in the health impact of buildings. Yeah. Actually, at some point in my life, I wanted to study medicine, but I didn't have the grades to go to medicine. But I was really young age. And then while in Chile, I was working for the government, looking at slums within the Chile. And I had to travel a lot. And also I used to work for a small foundation that provided housing. So I was quite lucky enough to travel my country and to see poverty and slums and ghettos and people without house at all. But one thing, and the government at that time was providing housing through subsidies. So what happened is I realized that the type of building that we were building for families in different climate conditions within the country were the same. And the type of heating system that people were using were not regulated. So actually the environment in itself was quite toxic and really unhealthy. And the properties were really poor. So this is when everything started. Is okay, do you know what? I mean, there's something here that I would like to know more, I mean, explore and do research, which was about what is the real impact of building on health. And then I arrived to do my PhD at UCL, and the topic was initially the rebound effect. Are you familiar with the rebound effect and energy?
Yeah.
But then quickly moved to humidity in buildings. Just because my group here was reviewing the Part F regulations. So actually my topic, I mean, I formed part of a team at the time, and my PhD was about mold and humidity. So the whole PhD was the small paragraph in the Part F 2006. Was that correct? So this is how everything started.
Yeah.
And so I had to do the experimental work, the field work, data analysis. We did a lot of stuff, and part of the outcome of my PhD was to change Part F, approved document F, which still is the same couple of tables that we proposed at the time with the team. So this is how everything started.
And that's the 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month.
Yeah,
relative humidity and the surface water activity table.
Yeah. So this is why they recognize that the important aspect is actually the surface humidity or the material's humidity, not necessarily the humidity in air. Obviously, that air humidity is going to have an effect on the surfaces and the materials. But that interaction between mold and humidity, it happened on surfaces. It happened on materials.
Do we use that figure enough, do you think?
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
That surface water activity, equilibrium, humidity, this kind of, we talk about relative, that Goldilocks zone, relative humidity, and I think everybody broadly understands that. And I think they can convert that mentally quite easily if they want to into the is it spending a week above 65 or a day above 85 or whatever. So I think people get that, but I very rarely hear people talk about surface water activity.
They do it. In this project that I mentioned that we were developing a diagnostics tool, we use it there. And that was the way in some way to tell you if the building envelope was thermally good enough or was affecting the mold formation. So anyway, so this is how everything started, and then from there I moved. I have done a lot of the stuff, to be honest. It hasn't been just mold. I have been looking at infection disease transmission at some point, which was tuberculosis, flu, other things, but also always linked with the built environment.
Yeah.
And then later on vector-borne diseases. And this is also something that I have been doing lately, which is putting proposal to try to understand mosquitoes in the UK, which is something, I really get interested on methods and new subjects and new discipline, to be honest. I mean, I really love that. And always within the built environment. And with mold, also, we are doing some experiments with the lighting, with acoustics. Try to understand mold in a different way.
Yeah. And one of the fabulous resources you've got now is here east in UCL and the labs out there. I mean, that must be an absolute playground for you guys.
It is an amazing facility. Yeah. Every time we will go there, when you enter here east, the whole location around Stratford you get into the lab, and I feel super proud of being able to have that kind of facilities that has helped us a lot to do research and to help our PhD students.
Yeah.
It's not just the facility that we have within our department, but it's actually the interdisciplinary that occur in here is because there are people from other departments, and it's a really small community, but it's an extremely rich community. It doesn't feel the same, for example, in Bloomsbury, at least for me. You go into this building, you interact with other academics, but over there, you interact with the student, with researchers, with other academics from other departments, with the admin team, cleaners. Everyone seems to be involved, and we are all helping each other.
Yeah, and there's everything there from robotics, isn't there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in terms of our facility, we have, with the years, UCL has helped us to improve what we have. And also because, in one of my colleagues, Valentina, she's into materials. So we have a huge number of equipment that allow us to understand more moisture within materials. And in my case, which is more about indoor quality and molds, we have also some kind of facilities there that allow us to look at that. So, yeah.
I think what's fascinating for lay people like myself that go into environments like here, they're not unique, but it is particularly special there, is that science brought to life element that you get and feel there. Because academia can seem quite a stuffy, distant place sometimes, very theoretical in nature. But when you go, particularly in construction science and building material science, you go to a place like that and it's instantly brought to life.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Very viscerally. You're walking around and there are people building walls with bricks and putting them in environmental chambers and soaking them, and you've got sound chambers and it just bursts to life. And I think creates a connection between the theoretical and the real world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that intermediary space where science meets the real. And you always, been there a couple of times now, and you always come away from the place kind of invigorated about the future of that kind of construction science.
That's happened to me every time that I go there. So
Yeah.
It's not just for you.
Yeah.
I feel super alive when I go there. I really love it.
Is it a full academic course now? Is it bursting with talent and people down there now? It's a lively place, this part of your UCL, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Environment, yeah.
But in which way? What?
You're getting the influx of students. You're getting the talent in. You're getting some good people coming through. Yeah.
We have undergraduate students coming to here and using the facilities. We have a couple of courses that we have developed with other departments, but also within our own department. We have a number of MSc programs that make use of the facilities over there, and we try to make our courses as practical as possible.
Yeah.
And we have a number of PhD students. So there's the people that you have met in our conference when we're there. So, which are really hand-on and all of them doing experimental work, which is amazing. And I love them. They're all super, super amazing researchers.
And what is it you broadly teach here in UCL, Hector? Because it's like you say, it's not just damp. I'm talking to you about damp and mold today, but it's more. It's much broader sustainability, energy piece as well, isn't it?
I teach a module. I'm in charge of the module. It's called Building Solar Design, which is basically integrated design. It's passive design, bioclimatic design, and in that module, the student learn different tools and different concepts, but they have to apply in a project, the design project. So they have to design a house. And every year I try to change slightly the location. And this year we are working with an NGO in Lesotho, which is the country in the south of Africa. And this NGO works with the communities on architecture and developing businesses. And so I thought, okay, why not to develop a house into locations in the mountains or Lesotho and in the main capital. So the students have to do that. They have to design a passive house in that location. This is one of the modules that this is the module that I'm in charge. But I teach in other programs and in other areas. I teach methods of environmental analysis, mainly monitoring and equipment, how students can use that. I teach also about mold, and humidity in buildings. This is for a program that look at health in buildings.
Yeah.
And I teach also, there's another I have a lecture. I forgot for which program it is, but it's about indoor quality. It's about but I give just examples. I mean, this is just general what is important.
Yeah.
I mean, indoor quality in buildings, but it's mainly examples of buildings that I have monitored. So I just tell them what works, what doesn't work, etc. What is the issue, for example, in this particular building with the MBHR, the issues that we have found. Problem with the controls, so the system we use as a cooling system, as an air conditioning, but the building was overheating anyway. Problem in changing the filters. Problem on how the installation was done. But it's just really basic things. It's more examples of case studies so students understand. Because there's no point of us just showing them. Teaching them the theory. It's also, let's see what we as an academics, as researchers, we have found.
See, one way or another, you've got a lot going on. And then on top of that, you're involved in the UKCMB as well. What's your role in the UKCMB?
I'm academic
director, yeah. How did you first, because you've been involved in the UKCMB since its inception, really, haven't you?
Not really. No, I joined the UKCMB, I will say a couple of months after it happens. I wasn't really involved in the beginning. It was Neil May, who was the one that founded this, and with another colleague of mine. But quite quickly they needed more help, and the UKCMB is about motion buildings, and so Neil recruited us, which is the people that were working in motion building at the time, which was Valentina and myself, plus other academics from civil engineering, and Peter Rickaby, Colin King, etc. And and this is how everything started.
Yeah. And today the UKCMB continues to do its work.
Yes.
What fundamentally is the kind of the goal of the UKCMB? It's there as a resource primarily, isn't it? And a centre for research, pulling together a number of institutions to look at things like moisture in buildings. Yeah, it's got a number of things it does.
Well, we do a lot of things, and with time and years, things have changed. And so we are doing different stuff with different type of activities. Initially, and it's still the ethos of the UKCMB, trying to make or to help the industry and the public in general to understand moisture in buildings. That is what we want. So we want to reduce the risk of moisture in buildings as much as we can. And to do that, we have created tools, animation, videos explaining simple concepts, but difficult concept, but in a simple way. We have created where we have been participating in a number of building regulations and helping other professionals within the country on developing them. We have created courses like the condensation dump and mold, understanding the risks in buildings, etc. So everything quite practical, just to help practitioners and to help industry.
I'll put a link in the show notes, by the way, particularly to the videos as well, that introduce concepts like moisture balance and mould and so on, I think.
And there's the other one, which is a bit more of mold, which is just talk about mold, which is quite nice. Since 2021, we've decided to have our own international conference on mold, and this is motion buildings, and this is something that we initially discussed with Neil. So I told Neil, you know what, I think every year most of us and many academics that attend a conference internationally, you go there, you present your papers, your work on motion buildings, but usually you are just one of a few in the conference. So I just told him, well, listen, why we don't create our own conference and we bring together all those academics and we just talk about motion buildings. based on the different work themes that at that time we proposed. And we ran the conference 2021, which was an online conference. It was a success. It was really good. And thanks to, obviously, the people that work with the UKCMB, PhD students and academics. So it was really good. And then in 2023, we ran again the conference online and in person in Here Is.
Yeah,
you were there.
I was there for that one, yeah.
Which I think was good.
That was my first introduction to Here East, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, because you were doing the guided tours.
Yes,
exactly. It was brilliant. Yeah.
So I think it went really well. In all respect, it wasn't a big conference, but good enough to create this kind of family of people working around the area. And but organizing a conference is quite a huge challenge. And it's a lot of work. So what we decide, because it's an international conference, we spoke with a few colleagues in other countries, and we said, well, do you want to take this to your universities? And a couple of them come back saying, yes, we want, we're really interested. But finally, one of them say, yes, I can do it. So this year is going to run in Portugal.
Brilliant.
And so, yeah.
So is there, is it purely links with academic institutions that driving this, or is it able to sit under a more of an international umbrella in some way? Because, you know, moisture in buildings is, like you say, an international problem. There are some countries that have centres for moisture, you know, like Sweden, for example, was the seed really that started the UKCMB with Neil. But to get conferences to run internationally, I guess that's quite hard, because you're going to have to get an academic institution to take it on.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we are open to any organization that want to take the conference. We're happy with that. I mean, the conference is not a conference just for academics; it's a conference also for industry. So,
for sure.
At least I haven't seen the abstract that have been sent now to the conference in Portugal, but at least in the other two, you have a number of research done by industry, and that was the purpose of this conference. It's not for academics only. There are many industry or the companies that do research.
Yeah.
And we welcome that.
And organisations that are dealing with the problems as well. I mean, a big component of the moisture conference in 2023 was things like heritage organisations dealing with, you know, older buildings and maintaining and managing infrastructure.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a really broad and diverse challenge, moisture in buildings, and an international one. I'd say it would be fascinating. And I remember from my conversations with Brandon Chapo, like he was really keen to join the dots of international expertise, because there's nothing worse, and we see this so often in academia, is people treading ground that has already been done somewhere else. And because dots haven't been able to be connected, wasting years finding out stuff that could have been, you know, not saying you don't replicate and check and what have you, but we spend a lot of time, I think, in research doing stuff that's probably been done somewhere else for lack of us actually knowing that it was done somewhere else. You know, it's a real problem. Yeah, for all the literature reviews and everything that you can do, nothing beats getting in rooms with people that are dealing with the same problem but from a different angle.
Yeah, absolutely.
To help you think outside the box, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think this is the conference has that kind of purpose. And also, I mean, the other thing that we do at the UKCMB is we work with PhD students that if you go to our website, you're going to see the affiliates. And we have people from different countries that are part of this. And we make a big effort on trying to put them together and create activities for them.
And one of the other things you do with the UKCMB is run some courses as well, I think, or certainly have developed some training.
Yes.
Things like local authorities for damp and mould, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah. Just after everything started in this country because of the boy that died, and there was a need of training for local authorities. And Peter Rickaby designed a course that then we adopted within the UKCMB, and we have been delivering that course for different local authorities within the country. It's called Condensation Dam and Mould, which is not a really it's just a quite boring name.
Yeah, but your marketing department needs to get a hold of that. Do something sexy with it.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's just to go. But what we are doing at the moment, and we are hoping that we're going to launch, is an online version of that course. And because, I delivered the course a couple of times, and you can see that actually delivering a course on 2 days, full days, is quite time consuming, quite tiring. And and you don't see that much interaction from participants, which is something that I personally don't like. So we decided to create this online course, which is for people to do in their own time. So it's 3 weeks, and it's through one of these platform on the internet. So when this is done, you're gonna see it somewhere that had been launched.
Yeah. And if it's available, we'll get it on the show notes as well, or certainly links to this UKCMB. So
it's going to be in the UKCMB for sure. We're going to advertise the course.
Yeah. So the conference this year is in Portugal.
It's in Portugal, the University of Minho.
Okay.
Is in
and when is that? Is September, October? I think
it's October the 20th something.
Okay.
So at the end of October. So we are now in the process of. As the scientific committee is receiving the papers to review. I mean, I'm really optimistic about the conference. Is the people around the world that is doing research in the area, so it's quite good. As you said, I mean, it varies from mold to health to heritage to retrofitting. It goes to new buildings. Materials. So this is quite a range. It's not just about mold, it's about motion buildings.
Yeah. And I think that was the eye opener for me from those conferences, was quite how expansive the subject is. Mm-hmm. And because you don't deliberately do, you do tend to get quite funneled into your own world sometimes, and they're quite good, those conferences, to break it down. God, I never even thought of that as an issue before. But I mean, moisture in buildings is a big universal problem, isn't it? Fundamentally.
Yeah, absolutely. And the people in this university in Portugal, actually, they have added new topics because it's the type of research that they do, and we were super open to that.
Yeah. Also, the great thing about different jurisdictions, I suppose, they would always have a different frame.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're really pleased that they decided to take it, and they have taken a huge. I mean. Organizing a conference is quite complex. So it's really, you need a lot of resources, time consuming, coordinating all the people that are going to help you. That's the rooms, and oh my God, it's so many things.
I had the misfortune of hosting the AOVC conference in Dublin there last September, October. And we had the backing of INEVE, who have been organising these for time immemorial. So it's a very well-oiled machine of getting there. But even still, there's a lot of work in it.
It is a lot of work.
Every time I ever get involved in any kind of an event, the overwhelming feeling out the other side of it is like, I don't do that for a living.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, and in our space, even though we have the support from UCL in terms of providing the location, the rooms, everything was done with a group of PhD students, undergraduate students, and the academics a few academics. So it was so much work. Yeah, but I think who really put major effort there were our PhD.
Yeah, put a marker down as well for I think with those kind of conferences, if you put a decent one on, it kind of sets the standard for what the next group that takes it on is trying to achieve. Yeah, so which is really good. Well, Hector, look, it's been brilliant chatting to you today. What I'll definitely do is include UCL stuff and Here East. There's some good stuff online about Here East with videos and things about the area. So I'll put that on, and some stuff around the UKCMB. You're exceptionally busy, so I appreciate enormously sitting down and chatting with me this morning. It's been great to finally organise it and get ownership. Yeah.
Finally. No, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to talk with you and to be part of this podcast.
Brilliant.
Venture.
Thanks, Hector. Thanks for listening. Before you go, can I ask a favour? If you enjoyed the podcast and know someone else who might be interested, do spread the word and let's keep building this community. And do check out the YouTube channel by the same name and subscribe if you can, as there will be additional content posted here quite regularly. This podcast was brought to you in partnership with ACO, Ultra Protect, Imbiot and Erico, all great companies who share the vision of this podcast. Your support of them helps their support of the show. Do check them out in the links and at airqualitymatters.net. See you next week.